All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is editor of the League Express newspaper, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, we've just been having a bit of a chat. We've just realised this is our 50th episode today, so happy birthday, I guess, mate.
Well, I was just saying, Jake, where's the birthday cake? We should have had one, shouldn't we? Instead, we've just got a cup of tea each. Yeah. So, we've got to celebrate with a cup of tea. But yes, my goodness, we've been doing this for a year. Yeah. Can you believe it? And, when you first walked into this office and said, I was about doing a podcast, and I said, yeah, that's a great idea, Jake. And we've been doing one ever since, and here we are. A year later, a year older, probably no wiser.
No wiser. Might have even, gotten a little bit dumber over the last 12 months.
But even more enthusiastic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Flash back to that first day. I remember when I came in, we're still waiting on all the equipment to arrive in the post, if you remember. So we got all the equipment and finally set everything up. And thankfully it all went smoothly on that first episode. So, yeah, hopefully.
And thank you for everything you've done in that time. It's been really great knowing you and participating with you in this podcast. Yeah. It's been so much fun, Jake. It really has.
No, definitely. And obviously, mate, couldn't have done it without you and all your insight into our competition, mate. But
which is pretty limited sometimes.
But anyway, mate, enough about us. We'll get into all the action that happened over the weekend, a few interesting results, but we'll start with the Lee Leopards game. They defeated Cass 20 points to 10. What was your reaction to this game, Martyn?
In the previous game, Lee had beaten St Helens 46 points to 4 with an absolutely fantastic performance. And I'm one of those people, and I've written about it again in this week's League Express. I don't think any team can play at its highest level on a regular basis. I think you've got to have highs and lows. For all the time I've been watching rugby league, I've never thought that any team can be at its best permanently. And Lee certainly weren't at their best against Castleford. They were, a bit below par. They'd got one or two players absent. Obviously, Matt Moylan wasn't playing. He'd got a bit of a rib problem. Hopefully, will play tonight against Wigan. And when Castleford took the lead with a really excellent try by young Fletcher Rooney, who, great to see a young player being selected for their side, I thought, my goodness, I can see a bit of a shock happening here if we're not careful. But fortunately, Lee did enough to win the game from their point of view, and their top six challenge remains. I think they're, what is it now? Before they play Wigan tonight, they are 5 points outside the top six, but they've got a game in hand. So it would be really useful for them to beat Wigan if they possibly can. But, I thought they did enough to win without being spectacular. And that was probably just what Adrian Lamb wanted, I would think.
How do you think the next week will sort of pan out for them? Obviously, they're playing 3 games in a relatively short period. Do you think this could have lasting effects on the squad going forward?
Well, it could do, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I can't understand why that outstanding game against Wigan wasn't played on the international weekend. I think that would have been the obvious time to play it, even though, obviously there were players who might have been absent for that international game. Nonetheless, that wouldn't have put so much pressure on either side. But, we've got what we've got, and they're playing tonight, and if Lee don't win tonight, it doesn't necessarily mean that their top six challenge is over, but it will be obviously very much harder with, I think it's 6 games. Is it 6 games remaining after tonight's game? So, it's going to be, 7 games remaining after tonight. They'll have played 20 games. So they've still theoretically got a chance of making it, but if they win tonight, it'll be so much easier.
We'll move on to Wigan. So they beat Giants 28 points to 14. Good to see them back in the winning column, I guess.
Well, it was for their supporters, not so much for the Giants fans, of course. But Huddersfield were winning 8-0 at half time, and it did look as though there might be a shock on the cards there. But Wigan were coming into this game on the back of 2 defeats, which had been very unexpected in both cases, in my view. And they, including that shellacking by Warrington. So they obviously, their confidence had been hit a bit. And in the first half, it looked as though they were, heading for the same result. But in the second half, they upped their game and ran away with it a bit, and were clear winners in the end. And maybe their run of bad form has now come to an end, and we'll see tonight whether they manage to beat Lee or not, I suppose. But as I say, even the best team. I mean, I still think Wigan are the best team in the game, but even they can't play at their best every week.
That's right. It's a long season. And,
it is. It's very long.
Maintaining that consistency, quite tough. Friday night's match-up, we had Hull KR 22 defeating Warrington 4, the top-of-the-table clash.
I thought Hull KR were... Well, yeah, I mean, I had tipped Warrington to win. But you bear in mind that in the previous two games, Warrington had won at St Helens and they'd won at Wigan, giving magnificent performances on both occasions. Again, I don't want to keep coming back to this, but... could they do it 3 times in a row and beat Hull Kingston Rovers in the same way? And the answer was no, they couldn't. They couldn't. They fell from what they'd achieved at Wigan a week earlier. Hull KR were absolutely magnificent, I thought. Michael Lewis was brilliant. Scored a brilliant try, kicking and then collecting the ball and beating several defenders to go over for a great try. And it always looked as though Hull KR were going to win that game. Warrington gave a debut to John Bateman. I'm not sure. It was probably wise to change the team actually from the Wigan win, but John had about 50 minutes, I think, on the field and didn't do badly, but didn't do enough to help Warrington to win the game. I'm sure he'll be better as he'll probably have some more incisive influences in their side as the weeks go on. He's still a very good player. But they were well beaten, and Hull KR deserved to win, and Hull KR deserved to be at the top of the Super League table, which of course they might not be after tonight's game if Wigan beat Lee, but it's the first time ever, Jake, that Hull KR have been at the top of the Super League table. Wow. So they had about 2,000 fans at Warrington, and it was a long journey from Hull KR to Warrington, but they will have gone home very happy indeed on Friday night. It was great to see, really, from their point of view.
Very vocal fans as well.
Very vocal. Oh, gosh, yes. Possibly the most vocal fans in the competition.
Yeah.
But I still, it's interesting because I think they probably had about 2,000 fans at Warrington, give or take a few. And the crowd was 12,102, I think. Well, I'm still puzzled by the fact that Warrington aren't drawing sellout crowds because, they'd beaten Saints, they'd beaten Wigan, they were coming into a top-of-the-table clash against Hull KR. I would have thought that stadium would have been sold out. And I find this a real puzzle with Warrington. They're, potentially a great side. They've got some great players in the side. They're coached by a charismatic guy in Sam Burgess. They just signed John Bateman to make his debut for them. They've got a great social media presence, and yet they're not drawing the crowds that they ought to be drawing and that they frankly deserve. And I don't know why that is. I'm not offering any solutions here, but I'm just puzzled that they're not drawing bigger crowds.
Do you think Super League Plus has had an impact on their crowd figures?
Well, it might have done. I mean, you could only ask those people who are not turning up for games at Warrington. But, Warrington have done a lot of what on the surface looked to be very smart things. I mean, they did a thing a few weeks ago saying that, a lot of people from Hong Kong have moved to the Warrington area in recent years. And they did a thing to target those people, giving them some, free tickets to come and watch a game and then hoping that they'll carry on later. But are those sort of campaigns successful? I'm never quite sure. I mean, I simply don't know whether there were many of those, people who have come from Hong Kong in the crowd on Friday night. Maybe there were, maybe there weren't. But you can't criticise Warrington for, not trying to do the right thing. But it just doesn't seem to work for them somehow.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've been to a fair few Warrington games over the past 12 months, and just when you sort of go there via the train, you get off the train, you're walking towards Halliwell-Jones Stadium, and there's a few pubs that are always full pre and post match with Warrington supporters and whoever the visiting team is. So they do provide a really good game day experience.
Oh gosh, yes, of course they do.
There's no question about that. But Yeah, and even to your point, with how well they're doing, especially they've handed John Bateman, their new recruit, the debut. You'd think that would attract a few more fans as
You'd have
well.
thought so, but
But yes,
it's a strange one. It's a strange one, and I'm not being critical of Warrington, because as I say, I think they deserve more fans than they're getting. But I just don't know why they're not attracting more people.
Sam Burgess was pretty entertaining in his post-match presser. He was almost, he wasn't, how would you say, giving many reasons for why Warrington lost. He just flat out said Hull KR were just that much better than us tonight.
They were. Sometimes you've got to hold your hands up and say the opponents played incredibly well.
Yeah.
And on the day, they were too good for us. On another day, they might not have been.
That's right.
Because Warrington have beaten Hull KR previously this season. They won at Hull KR. So, and it's great that results. Games are unpredictable. That's what we want, isn't it, in our competition?
And Willie Peters, he was very level-headed in the post-match presser. He sort of said that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. So there's still a long way to go yet. So
that's right.
It's promising signs, though. We'll say.
Promising signs for Hull KR, there's no doubt about it. And Willie Peters, you have to say what a great job he's done. Whether they can go on and win the grand final, it's anybody's guess, isn't it? That they've certainly got a chance of winning it. And I would love to see Hull KR at Old Trafford, because I think they'd bring a terrific crowd and they'd bring so much enthusiasm. And it would be marvellous to see them there. But just because they're top of the league at the moment, it doesn't mean to say they will be there, of course.
I think one thing that does work in their advantage as well is this time last year they were dealing with the aftermath of that Challenge Cup final defeat, whereas this year they don't really have any of that to deal with. So, fingers crossed they can go well heading into playoffs. But we'll move on to Saturday's matchups. We had St Helens finally bounce back, 46 points to 6 over Hull FC.
Well, I wasn't remotely surprised by that. I was surprised a bit by the scoreline, because I thought Hull have improved a bit over recent weeks, and I didn't think they'd yield to that degree. Although it was very tight at half time, and Saints ran away with it late in the game. But I always thought that Saints would bring that 5-game run of defeats to an end when they got to Hull. They've got too many good players, Jake, to for that not to happen. And Saints will be in the mix for the grand final. Have no fear about that. They will be challenging. They know how to perform when the big games come at the end of the season. So anybody thinking that Saints are going to drop out of the top 6, I'm afraid you. Well, I think you're wrong if you think that. And, I think Saints are far too good to do that, even though they still have a lot of injured players. Some of those players will come back towards the end of the season, and Saints will be a threat to anybody.
Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a question here. Who needed that win more, do you think, Paul Wellens or Lewis Dodd?
Well, Paul Wellens probably, because at the end of the day, Lewis Dodd he's got his contract fixed with South Sydney.
Yeah.
He was, whatever happens to St Helens in the rest of the season, he knows where he's going to be next year, and he's going to be earning extremely well when he goes to Australia. So, it was Paul Wellens. Having said that, I think Paul Wellens, there was some talk, wasn't there, about Paul being his position being under threat. Well, I think that's a nonsense, actually. I don't think St Helens would move against Paul Wellens, primarily because the people who run the club know perfectly well the injury problems that Paul is having to face. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, that Hull KR are at the top of the table, and they've been the club probably least affected by injuries this season. It's always the case in rugby league that if a club can go through the season without too many serious injuries, they will tend to do well. And Hull KR are showing the proof of that, and good luck to them. Their medical team is obviously great at sorting out minor injuries so that players can play on a week-to-week basis. And but Saints have been hit by bad injuries, as have Hull FC, of course. So it's a truism in rugby league that if you can keep a consistent squad, then you'll tend to do well.
Yeah, and news that Jack Wellesby, it looks like he won't be back until late September, I believe. So
it looks that way, doesn't it? Yeah,
which is a huge loss. We all know what he can bring to a football side.
But this young man who's playing for them, at full back at the moment, looks a really good young player, doesn't he? Yes, it's Harry Robertson. Absolutely. I've just not got used to him yet, I'm afraid. You're so used to seeing Jack Wellesby at full back, but Harry Robertson wearing squad number 33. I think he'll have a much lower squad number next year, that young man.
Yep.
And he looks, another Jack Wellesby, really, they're describing him, aren't they? So, that's going to be an interesting headache for St Helens, actually, next year, because this young kid, by the time Jack Wellesby comes back, young Robertson will have consolidated his position in the team, no doubt. And next year he'll be pressing for a regular spot. So you can't play two full backs, can you? Yeah. Or at least maybe you can, and Paul Wellens can find a way to do it. Who knows?
They could potentially move Wellesby into the halves, but
they could do
with Dodd leaving, but. Yeah, that's a headache for him to sort of work through.
Absolutely,
ahead of next year. But we'll move on to the next matchup. We had Salford 22 points defeating Leeds 16. Leeds had a bit of a lead at the start of this matchup.
Well, what a game, actually. I love watching Salford, I've got to say. Of all the teams in Super League, I think they're the team I probably enjoy watching most. I enjoy watching every team, but Salford just always seem to me to have something special. Again, I mean, if we're talking about attendances, I was saying Warrington don't get what they deserve. Well, certainly Salford, you can add that comment and emphasise it, because they ought to be getting far more than they are. But Leeds needed to win that game to sustain their challenge for the top six. They went 12-0 up in less than 10 minutes. You thought, well, they're going to walk away with this one. But Salford fought back and, eventually came out the winners, and deservedly so. And, Callum Watkins, I thought the ex-Leeds player, now the Salford captain, had an absolutely great game. We made him our player of the week, just ahead of Mikey Lewis, incidentally. Fabulous performance by him, fabulous performance by the side as a whole. And there's another thing I just want to bring up, Jake. There was one incident in the game that again illustrates a rule that I hate, and it was when Nenny MacDonald was disallowed a try because of a double movement. I think the double movement rule is absolutely ridiculous, and if a player can get the ball over the line and ground it before the referee calls held, I think the try should be allowed. But in this case, Nenny MacDonald fell just before, he was brought down just before the line, about 6 inches short, and Lucky Miller just had a hand on him, and that was counted as being a completed tackle. And when he just promoted the ball 6 inches, he was then penalised instead of being awarded the try. Now, that, as the rules stand, that was a perfectly correct decision. No criticism of the referee or the video referee. I think, as the rules stand, those were the correct decisions. No problem with that at all. But I just think the rule itself is absolutely ridiculous. And it's funny, in last week's podcast, I mentioned Nenny MacDonald not being allowed to try because of when he caught the ball and it bobbled between him and Jacob Miller of Castleford. This week it was another Miller, but Lucky Miller, who participated in that tackle that stopped MacDonald from being awarded the try. So, hopefully MacDonald won't be coming up against too many other Millers the rest of the season.
The MacDonald-Miller curse.
Yes.
No, I agree with you, mate. I've always scratched my head around, why we outlaw the double move, and if you're good enough to get your arm and the ball over the line, I think you should award the try.
And in last week's podcast, you said that rule didn't apply in American football, which I didn't know. But I think also the double movement rule doesn't apply in rugby union, does it?
No, I don't believe so. So, because I remember, like back when I was younger, watching a bit of union and seeing someone score off a double movement and the try was awarded, and I was just like, oh,
yeah, that wouldn't be awarded in our game. Yeah.
Yeah, so
ridiculous, really.
I think there's a lot of things like, as we touched on last week, that our sport can learn from rules in other sports.
Of course, yeah.
Like the situation where a player finds themselves in an opportunity to do a double movement. It happens so rarely, just because of how well teams defend their line at the moment. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer.
I mean, it's made worse by the fact that you actually concede a penalty. I'm quite sure that against Leeds, Nenny McDonald probably didn't even realise that Lucky Miller had his hand on him. So put the ball over the line. Now, if you're going to say that a double movement is not going to be allowed, surely the thing to do would be to say, well, play the ball, where you was tackled. But it seems so harsh to give away a penalty for that when a player may not even be aware that somebody's got his hand on him. So ridiculous to me. Anyway,
absolutely.
that's done that.
That's
issue.
our gripe of the week.
Yeah, gripe of the week. Yeah, I don't know.
But they're good gripes.
Yeah, well, we'll see what next week's is. Yeah.
We'll see what the people in the comments say. I think there was a few people agreeing with you in the comments
yes,
last
I think
week,
so,
Martyn.
yeah.
So
there were. Yeah,
we'll see what people think this week.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Now, we had the feel-good story of the week on Sunday. London defeated Catalans 12 points to 10.
Yeah, fabulous.
A really good performance from London.
It was. And I'll tell you what, this young lad, Josh Rourke, who plays at full-back for them, he will be playing in Super League next year for somebody, I'm fairly sure. He looks a real good player to me. And he's got a very interesting history. He was... As a young lad, he was a very good football player and actually signed on as a kid with Preston North End, apparently, but didn't make it there and went back to playing amateur rugby league with. I think he lived in Chorley and played for the Chorley Community Club, and but eventually didn't come through the normal route and eventually got picked up by Salford, and he played one game for Salford in the very last game of the regular season in 2022. But Salford didn't retain him, and instead he signed for Whitehaven and spent the whole of 2023. I think he played something like 28 games for Whitehaven, and at the end of the season he won every Player of the Year award, the Club Player of the Year, the Fans Player of the Year, the Coaches Player of the Year, the Players Player of the Year. He was very clearly the outstanding player for Whitehaven in 2023. And on the basis of that, Batley signed him to play in the Championship again this year with them. But then in his contract, he had a clause that said if a Super League club came in for him, he could sign for them. And so before the season started, London Broncos, came in for him and offered him a position there. And he accepted it. But then, in a pre-season game against Oldham, he broke his leg and was out for 4 months with a broken leg, and has only come into the Broncos side very recently, and has been outstanding in my view. And he was again. He actually, his biggest contribution on Sunday was probably a tackle on Fouad Yaha. When Fouad Yaha, the Catalans winger, looked certain to score, Josh Rourke tackled him into touch right by the corner flag and prevented the try, which was a brilliant tackle. But he also, he played well throughout the game, took every high ball that came his way, and was just part of a London Broncos squad that absolutely thoroughly deserved to win the game, in my view, despite the Catalans, having Sam Tompkins in their side, who I thought played very well, incidentally, Sam. But it was a deserved but very tense victory. And the best thing of all, there were about 2,000 people in the stadium, the Cherry Red Records Stadium. And the best thing, Jake, was listening to the crowd chanting London, London, or Broncos, Broncos. The crowd, I mean, there might not be that many of them, but my goodness, they got behind them. And it's just so great to, I mean, I'm a rugby league evangelist, really. And I love to see the game. I love to see the game being taken up by a London audience, even if it's not as big as we'd like it to be. And them shouting their team home, which is effectively what they did. And I just thought it was fabulous, and it was great to see, them celebrating afterwards, and, the players going round their fans and being so warmly embraced and so on. And Mike Eccles, the coach, being able to smile after the game, which is obviously something that's not happened very often this year. It's only the second win of the season.
Yeah.
So, you've got to feel good for London. And as I've said to you before, it's such a damn shame that they're not going to be in Super League next year. Although at half time, David Hughes was interviewed on the pitch by Mark Jones, the commentator, and who sort of, he asked David whether he's, accepted that he won't be in Super League next year, and David gave a very equivocal answer, and more or less said, "Well, we'll see." So I don't know. Maybe there's something in the air. I certainly hope so, that might keep them there, but I wouldn't bank on it.
Well, each win they can get can only, further their case and strengthen their case.
And they still have to play Hull again this year, which, Hull are 2 points in front of them. So that's going to be an interesting one.
The biggest thing for them, if they can finish in front of Hull on the ladder,
gosh, yes.
God, they'll have a lot to shout about.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Yeah. And it would certainly put the cat among the pigeons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just back to, injuries and that sort of thing, it's great to see that Rourke is getting his chance, because let's just say that injury puts him out for the rest of this season. He doesn't get a chance to come on the big stage and showcase what he can do against Super League competitions. So really, really happy for him and to see he's doing well. And we'll see which teams come knocking for his services next year.
I'm sure there will be some.
All right, mate. So what we might do is we touched on it after the podcast last week. We want to start talking about our Albert Goldthorpe medal tally, mate. So
yes,
this week there's been not too much change at the top. Mark Sneed still leads with 26 points.
Yes, Mikey Lewis 20 points in second place, Matt Duffy 19 points in third, and George Williams 18 points in fourth. So Mark Sneed has everything to he's in pole position, but. And it's hard to imagine that he won't get more points as the season unfolds. But it's a great competition, isn't it?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
We might find a way to put that graphic in the video as well, so people can see the full list.
Yes,
but obviously,
it would be great.
If they do want to, have a look, just look in your weekly edition of League Express. You'll see it there.
And you can, that's right. And it's a great race for the title. I've not checked out the Man of Steel votes this week, I've got to say, but I suspect that that Mark Sneed is probably winning there as well, I would have thought, but we'll see on that one. But yes, interesting indeed. And Mikey Lewis, as I say, got 3 points for his brilliant performance against Warrington at the weekend, and he's a real potential challenger to Sneedy.
And he's his short kicking game has come a long way this year. He was really threatening Warrington with some of those crossfield chip kicks he was putting in. So, but yeah, all right, mate. We might get into some of the news doing the rounds over the last week or so. There's been a story in League Express this week. Was a bit of a two-part story, you might say. So, there's been reports that potentially 10 or more employees from the RFL could be made redundant in the coming weeks and months.
It looks as though it's going to happen. And when you talk to people from the RFL at the moment, they don't know who is going to get the push. But I've written before that the RFL is spending £750,000, which includes £450,000 on IMG, the IMG contract, and $300,000 being paid to non-executive directors who, by their nature are obviously not full-time people. Now, is it wise to keep paying that amount to those sources while you're making full-time people redundant within the organisation? And I'm not sure. it depends in a way, I suppose. You've got to say, we don't know, as I say, who's going to be made redundant, and we don't know what their roles are. So until a final decision is made, and I actually had an email from Tony Sutton a day or two ago saying that, he can't talk about it yet because the process hasn't run its course. So until it does run its course, it's difficult to talk with any authority about this. But obviously worrying times for some people who work at the RFL.
Yeah, extremely worrying. But what comes with that, there's a new director of marketing and communications role being advertised as well. So
you should be the main man for that.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could handle people like us scrutinising the RFL on podcasts every week.
Yeah.
But yeah, very interesting, mate. And I think in your column this week you mentioned how it'd be great to get someone involved in that role who has a really good knowledge and history of the game. Not someone who's just come in with a good marketing resume as such, but someone who knows what our game's all about.
Well, somebody ought to, because for a long time now, the RFL has appointed people to be the head of marketing from completely outside the game. And, individually they might be very fine people, I'm sure they are. But the trouble is, when you meet them, you often realise that they know nothing about our sport. They don't know its history. They don't know the way that people in the game interact with each other. They don't know what the various tensions are within the game. They don't understand the relationship between the RFL and the clubs. They don't understand who the great stars of our sport have been, what the great names are, and so on. And I think I make the point in my column this week that, if you mention Neil Fox to some of these people, some of them probably think he's an radio disc jockey rather than the greatest point scorer our game has ever seen. So I think it goes without saying that you need to understand what it is that you're trying to market. And you need to understand rugby league. You also need to understand a lot of other things, of course, as well. I'm not denying that. You need to understand the impact of social media. You need to understand how to apply a marketing budget. You need to understand how to draw fans into big games. But you do need to understand the game itself to a significant degree. And I don't think that that very often some of the people who take these jobs do fully understand what the game's all about.
And obviously, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't have access to their accountants and what their finances are like. But
well, the thing is, and that's the worrying thing, because is the new director of marketing going to have a budget to work with? I mean, because if he isn't, what's the point, really? And I've sort of said they've got to find a way of giving him one. Now, there are quite a few very wealthy club owners in rugby league, and maybe they need to club together to provide a marketing budget for whoever takes this job. But again, I mean, the clubs have been having the club owners have been having a series of meetings recently, and then they're clearly not happy with the direction the game is going in. And I suspect that we're going to see some changes. And I think we'll probably find that the club owners will get probably a couple of representatives to represent the clubs on the RL Commercial Board of Directors. Because at the moment, what they say is that they don't get a proper degree of communication about what's actually going on there. And of course the club owners, the other thing that's quite remarkable is the club owners have had no sight of the contract with IMG, so nobody's quite sure what IMG is supposed to do under the terms of that contract. Well, of course, if they get a couple of people on the board of RL Commercial, that presumably will change, because then they will be entitled to see what the contract says. So they'll then be in a better position to either push it forward or to critique it, and to decide whether it's really benefiting the game or not. So I think that's probably a good move. I don't think the clubs ought to be running the game, but I think it's they probably do need some representation.
That's right, and that's the thing. Like, we can make many suggestions in terms of marketing, in our seats right now. But if they don't have the funds to be able to afford those effective strategies, I mean, social media is free. They could, do their best to try and market the game better over social media. Often I'll be scrolling through Instagram or Facebook, and I'll see, a highlight post sort of pop up of a really cool player that a player's just done in a match, and you look at like the amount of people that are commenting and liking that post, and more often than not, there's only one or two comments. People aren't really interacting on their social media.
They're not brought out properly, are they? And I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that IMG said they wanted to do was to raise the profile of individual players, the top players in the game. Well, amen to that. We all want to see that. But the way they seem to be trying to do it is to give, to take some of the top players to places like Wimbledon or, major sporting events outside rugby league. Well, what good does that do? I don't really see the... I don't really see... I mean, it's great for the players concerned to have a day at Wimbledon. Marvellous. No complaint about that. But I'm not sure that it enhances the profile of our players to be doing that sort of thing. It you've got to do more imaginative things than that. You've got to focus attention on what the players are actually achieving on the field, and get more people to recognise how great it is. And, without doing that, you won't make much progress.
That's it. And, an easy way of doing that could just be putting together a little compilation of Bevan French's best tries or
the
Mikey
best tries of the weekend,
tries.
which I think they do, but I don't think they've got the reach that that they need to have. And, they need to find a way of packaging things in such a way as to extend their reach to potential new fans of the game, but also in doing that, making it easy for people who see those highlights packages to then come to a game and watch the game. Because without doing that, you can get people interested in the highlights packages, but if they don't then start watching the game, you're not getting much monetary value for money, are you? Let's face it.
That's right. Now, one of the other things I'm sort of interested to hear, I know when the NRL first decided that they were going to take games to Vegas, there was a lot of commentary from other people involved with other sports in Australia, whether it be the AFL or rugby union. It'd be interesting to see if there's any commentary coming out of rugby union in this country and what their thoughts are of the Super League taking a game over to Vegas. Because, are they sitting there thinking that, this might attract more people to rugby league? Are they concerned that this is potentially the start of some new growth?
I don't think they are concerned, and I've not seen any commentary from rugby union sources about us going to Vegas. But having said that, probably the message hasn't sunk in yet, and I think the rugby union. There's been a lot of talk recently. I've noticed with sevens rugby having been in the Olympic Games, there's been quite a lot of talk about how marvellous that was and what a big impact that's having in the United States. And I think they've got a World Cup of the 15-a-side version of rugby union lined up for the United States in a few years' time. So they do have their own eyes on the United States as a potential for the development of their game. And I mean, it's frustrating for me to see sevens rugby in the Olympics, played in front of full houses, by the way, in Paris, when we've got a version of, a mini version of rugby league called nines, which we don't seem to want to try to develop. Now, again, if I were going to be the director of marketing for the Rugby Football League or for RFL Commercial, I'd be encouraging the clubs to hold a midweek, nines tournament in the middle of summer, maybe over 4 or 5 weeks, just to test the water for for a rugby league version of sevens rugby, or rugby league version of the 100 in cricket, open our stadiums on Tuesday or Wednesday evenings, starting at say 6:30, playing for 2 or 3 hours, with several teams involved at each location, playing nines rugby, giving a decent prize for at the end of it for whoever wins the tournament, and let's see whether there's a potential market midweek for that sort of thing. We just seem to carry on with the same thing all the time in our sport. We get an idea, we hold a World Cup in nines, but then we don't hold it again. Just for goodness sake, we are hopeless at developing ideas. We don't have decent marketing strategies in our sport. We don't even seem to know how to create them, how to create demand for what I still think is the greatest game there is.
Because I'm trying to think of, was the Nines World Cup pretty much the last time we've had
yes, it was held in Perth, wasn't it?
In the nines sort of format.
Yes.
I don't even know if the NRL's done a pre-season nines tournament since.
Not for
then.
Several years. No, they used to hold them in Auckland, didn't they?
Yeah.
And then they stopped doing them.
Yeah, which is a great shame.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see nines come back as well, mate. All right, we'll move on to some other news. Last week, not long after we recorded our podcast, there was news that Melbourne Storm centre Remus Smith has signed with Catalans.
Yes, good player, and I'm sure he'll do the Catalans a lot of good. But the Catalans do need a bit of a boost, having lost at London, don't they?
Absolutely, and it'll be interesting. Obviously, Sam Tompkins is back now, so I can't see Smith getting that number one jumper. But when he was filling in at fullback for Storm in Pappenhausen's absence before, obviously Farlongo came along, he was a really good fullback as well.
Well, he will play at centre, won't he, for the Catalans?
Yeah, and Jared Wallace, obviously, he debuted over the weekend as well, scoring a try. So, they're starting to become bolstered towards the end of the season. Liam Marshall, he's extended with Wigan until the end of 2028.
Well, that will be his career, won't it? Because I think is he 28 now? I think he's going to be going into his 30s. So he will be spending his whole career with Wigan. He will get a testimonial with Wigan, which he'll richly deserve. A very fine young winger, great young kid as well. He's been slightly overshadowed by Jay Field and Bevan French, but I think he's in their class, really, in my view. And I think Wigan are very wise to have given him that deal.
Him and Miski on the wings, they're a very underrated winger pairing. I think.
Yes, I think so.
When you look across the board.
Yeah.
Also, news yesterday, New Zealand legend of the game, Shaun Johnsons, has announced that he's going to retire at the end of the season.
Well, the Warriors have had such a disappointing season in terms of results, haven't they? I think they're 5 points outside the top 8 now. They're in 13th place in the NRL ladder. I think they've got very little chance of getting into the top 8. And Shaun Johnsons, it's been a disappointing year for him, therefore. The curious thing is, we've been talking about crowds earlier in this podcast, and the Warriors have become the first NRL side in history to sell out every game, despite the fact that they're not going to qualify for the top 8. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? If you look at the NRL rankings now, some of the best supported sides are not going to finish in the top 8. You've got the Broncos, of course, your club, the Warriors, Newcastle Knights, very well supported. Parramatta, they can draw 30,000 when they're playing well at Combank Stadium, but they've had a disastrous year. So, as I say, some of the really well-supported sides are falling by the wayside, but they're still getting great support.
Yeah, which is great.
The Broncos are getting 40-odd thousand to most of their games, but it's quite amazing. At the weekend, of course, they were beaten at Seabus Super Stadium by the Gold Coast Titans, who were probably my favourite NRL side.
Yeah,
so it's,
and I believe Broncos were up 20-12 at half time.
They were, yes, they were winning at half time.
Yeah.
But this young man, Can Pereira, the winger for the Titans, is really grease lightning, isn't he? Brilliant player.
Quick, yeah.
Love watching him play, and love watching. I mean, I at the start of the season, they appointed Des Hasler as their new coach, and I thought that was a bad move. But I was clearly wrong. I you know, as so often, I do occasionally get it wrong, and I think I did in that case. And you know, Des has been great for them, and you know, I'd love to see them. They're just still not just 4 points behind the top 8 because they had a poor start to the season, but I'd love to see them make it, and I think they could give it a bit of a shake if they do.
And they're obviously playing all this great rugby without Tino Fa'asua Malawi and AJ Brimson as well.
Absolutely,
so 2 huge losses that, you know, they've found some form under Des, which has been great, and can only imagine what they'd be playing like if they did have those 2 players in the squad.
And the Bulldogs, my goodness, they're in 5th place now. They, you know, after so many years of mediocrity, they're back in the mix. And at the weekend, they played their game against the Raiders at Belmore, their spiritual home. They only play 2 matches a year there these days. All the other games are at Accor Stadium. And they had an absolutely full house, and it was an incredible celebration. And after the game, apparently all their fans drove around their district, you know, flying their flags, waving their scarves and honking their car horns.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, quite a sight, apparently.
Oh, and if that doesn't showcase the importance of having these games in suburban grounds...
Oh, nothing ever will now, exactly.
And obviously they're playing the Dragons at Cogra this weekend, which
big
will be...
sellout, yeah.
Another sellout.
Well, the Dragons are in the top 8, aren't they? Which is amazing, really, because at the start of the season... what everybody said about the Dragons was that they'd assembled a squad of players that nobody else wanted. And but Shane Flanagan, who was linked with a few jobs over here for quite a few years, the ex-Cronulla coach who ran into a bit of trouble at Cronulla, but he's, whatever you say about him, he's a very smart coach, and he's got them into the top 8. Whether they'll stay there, who knows? But, you know, what I love about the NRL is that you do get this movement in the table from one year to the next, so that the teams that, you know, Brisbane was second last year, they might miss out this year. You know, the Warriors were 4th in the league last year, but they're going to miss out. The Knights were 5th, but they're going to miss out this year. So, you know, you do get that incredible variation, don't you? And, you know, it's great to see clubs being in the top 8 who last year were clearly out of it. So it's a great competition, and you know, I do really enjoy watching. I mean, I love watching the Titans highlights against the Broncos. I'm sad to say, given that you're a Broncos fan.
Disappointed, mate. It was a quiet weekend in my household after,
I bet it
the
was.
Broncos
Yes.
lost. Very disappointing. Probably one of the. I mean, I think Parra did it a couple of years ago when they played Penrith in the grand final and didn't make the 8 the next year.
Yes.
Same thing's happened to Broncos now. So, yeah, I don't know what's going wrong with Brisbane. I think they've just had, you know, a big sort of grand final hangover followed by a trip to Vegas and back. And, unfortunately, they're going to need to have a big off-season and a big pre-season to get back to where they were last year. Losing a few players as well over the off-season didn't help.
Well, they need to rebuild, don't they? It's hard to put your finger on what's gone wrong at the Broncos, but, you know, they probably now need to be just looking ahead to next year. Do you think Kevin Walters is safe?
I think so. I think the CEO came out yesterday and said that Reynolds will be the captain next year and Kevin Walters will still be the coach. I just think that they're missing a little bit of senior leadership, and they had that in the form of Kurt Capewell at the start of the season, but obviously he made the late transfer over to the Warriors. So when Reynolds is off the pitch, because he spent a lot of time injured this year, it's sort of like the leaders are either Paddy Carrigan or Payne Haas. I think they just need someone that's got a little bit more seniority in the squad.
Well, they've had a few players out, including Reynolds himself this year. He was out for quite a while, wasn't he?
I think the origin period is never too friendly to the Broncos either. We always have a few players that get taken away from the squad for a few weeks, which, you know, we always say it should be held at the end of the year, or
it's difficult, isn't it?
A month, where clubs can have that month off and focus on rep footy. But yeah, I've written off the season for the Broncos.
Yes,
sadly, so
it's a shame, but yeah.
All right, mate. Any other news you'd like to touch on before we get into this weekend's matchups?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered most things there, but it's been quite interesting, hasn't it? And I think we can go straight to this week's games.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with tonight's matchup because we're filming on Tuesdays, and we got that catch-up game, Wigan versus Lee. Who do you like in this one, Martyn?
Well, I think I would have gone for Lee, but Tom Amone's missing again. He was missing against Castleford. He's serving time with the concussion protocols, and with him in their side, I think I would have gone for them. With him out of their side, even though Matt Moylan is back, or presumably is back tonight, I've obviously not seen. I mean, Matt is in the 21, but I've not seen the 17 yet. But even so, I think Wigan probably are now due for the run-in, and I think Wigan will have a strong run-in and will win the League Leaders' Shield. And I think Lee, it could just be one game too far for Lee tonight.
Yeah, especially, it's like we said earlier, it's short turnaround after short turnaround pretty much for these two sides.
Right.
So, it'll be interesting to see. Thursday night, we've got St Helens taking on Salford.
Well, again, I mean, Salford won at St Helens earlier in the year. This is a loop fixture, which a lot of fixtures are now as we get towards the end of the season. So in a lot of these games, we've seen a previous version of this game, and Salford had a narrow win at St Helens earlier in the year. I think St Helens will get their own back this Friday, or Thursday it is, isn't it, in fact? Yes, Thursday. But, I think that it's interesting. Both those teams are in the bottom, part of the top six. So whoever loses will be looking over their shoulder at Lee and Leeds, won't they?
Yeah, definitely. Friday night, we have Giants taking on Catalans.
Well, again, another difficult game for the Catalans, really. They've got some tough ones. The Giants will be desperate to register a win in front of their own supporters. I think they might do it, but I think it's a 50-50 game, Jake, and I think the Catalans will just sneak a victory here.
And I've said it before, I hate picking Huddersfield either for or against them in these matchups because you just don't know what Huddersfield side is going to turn up.
They often confound us, don't they?
Yeah. You sort of pick them in your tips and they lose, and then you don't pick them and they win. So yeah, it's a coin flip for me. Then we have Hull KR taking on Castleford.
Well, you've got to go with Hull KR on this one, haven't you? And but I if I were a Hull KR fan, I wouldn't be expecting them to play as well as they did against Warrington last week. Fortunately, against Castleford, I don't think they'll need to do that. But I think Castleford will give them a very good game, having said that. I think Cass, are a good side. They've improved, out of all recognition as the season's gone on. And I think they'll take Hull KR all the way. But I think Hull KR will win by probably about 6 points. Not easily.
Well, that's it. They set the benchmark pretty high last week, and then Willie Peters also said he wants the difference, to sort of that gap in the difference between their best and their worst to sort of really tighten up a bit.
Absolutely, yes.
Fingers crossed to have a good showing again. Saturday's games, we've got Leeds taking on Wigan.
Well, this will be Wigan's, third game in a very short space of time, and I think Leeds might shock them here. I know I'm sticking my neck out and to say that, but I think it could be a Leeds win. Leeds are going to be desperate. If they lose this game, they've probably had it as far as the top six is concerned. So, and I think the one thing that's improved a lot under Brad Arthur is their line defence. I think they're, coming out very aggressively to counter their opposition attack. And if they can just get some more creativity in their game, the problem for them was that they didn't, after that first 10 minutes against Salford, they didn't show a great deal of creativity. And I'm not quite sure why. But if they can just, put things together, I think they could win this game and sustain a challenge, even though it's looking, odds against them. I think they could still sustain a challenge for the top six.
Sunday's matchups, we have London taking on Warrington down in London.
Well, I loved watching London beat the Catalans, but I can't see them beating Warrington. So, I think Warrington will will win this one pretty comfortably, but I'm sure that London will put up a real spirited fight.
Do you think Warrington will take many fans down to London for that one?
Well, I hope so. I mean, they ought to. But who knows? Maybe 1,000 or so.
No, it's always a good opportunity. I think that's a good away.
It's a great little stadium to visit, isn't it?
No, it always looks good on TV. We've said this a few times, but it just looks like the perfect stadium.
I think we ought to send
London.
you down to do the report on it. Would you enjoy a trip to Wimbledon, to the Cherry Red Record Stadium?
I'd probably spend all my money down there and
you
have a night
would.
out afterwards. But
what we pay you for it probably wouldn't cover the cost, but
maybe
I wouldn't think.
And then we'll move on to the other match-up on Sunday, Leigh versus Hull FC.
Well, as I say, we don't know, how Leigh will have done at Wigan, but you would think that they would beat Hull, wouldn't you? Even though they'll have only had a 5-day turnaround, you would, if they are going to keep up that challenge for the top 6, they've got to win this game. And Hull, you would think. Again, Hull have improved, although the result against Saints didn't indicate that. But you've got to say that Leigh would be the strong favourites for this game.
It'll be interesting to see if Amon does get back for that one. Obviously, he's not playing tonight.
Yes, and if he does get back for it, I think they will win without the slightest doubt. And he will have probably welcomed the rest, actually.
No, definitely. And, he's such a crucial player for that squad. All right, mate. Well, we might wrap things up here. Don't forget, guys, if you want to get your subscription to League Express, head along to totalrl.com/.
Just one thing, just one final thing to mention. Now I've remembered it actually, Jay. Right. I often do this, don't I? No, you're just saying goodbye, and then I say let's just
throw another spanner.
I was really interested to see that the women's sevens competition in the Olympics, it was won by New Zealand, and 3 of those New Zealand players are going to be playing in the NRLW. Later this season, with possibly another one coming over to play in the NRLW next year. And it just strikes me that with the NRLW going professional, it's a great chance to get women rugby players from all over the world coming to Australia to play rugby league in the NRLW competition. It's much easier to get women rugby players to adapt to women's rugby league than it is to get male rugby union players to adapt to the NRL. It's because clearly the women's competition, which I think is terrifically entertaining and very skillful, but it's not developed yet as much as the men's game has. So I think when we're talking about getting more eyeballs on rugby league worldwide, if they could get some of the women from the American women's sevens teams to come over, for example, I think that would be a great lead-in to making rugby league more popular in the United States.
And I watched a lot of the women's sevens at the Olympics, and Canada had a really strong team.
Yes,
I think they made the final, I believe, as well.
I think they did. Yes,
Ireland's got a good team. The US.
South Africa, even.
South Africa, yeah. So there is potential markets there, that's for sure.
Well, potential players, potential players. And I think, they ought to be going all out to get some of those women.
Because I know a few years back, Charlotte Caslick, who's a really good Australian rugby sevens player, she came over and played for the Roosters.
She did. She had a season, didn't she?
Yeah. Emma Tonegato's another name who's...
started off in rugby union.
Yeah, and hasn't gone back. I think she stayed with... the NRLW, and she's one of the best players in the competition, so it'd be really interesting to see how those New Zealand players
and the star of the show is Jamie Chapman, isn't it? No.
Yes.
She looks a really great player, and she is somebody, when we talk about marketing of the game and marketing individuals, she is a player who the NRL should put a lot of resources into marketing, because she's a terrific player and a potential face of women's rugby league in Australia, in my view.
She scored a lot of tries, a lot of runaway tries
great
as
tries.
well.
Absolutely great ones.
There's something about watching someone out in the open streaking away down the field. There's something, I don't know, almost beautiful about it. It's like an art.
That's why I think rugby league is better than football, because to see a great rugby league try unfolding, especially when it begins in a team's own half, you can sort of, ride along with the climax. You can see the beauty of it unfolding. It's not just a player taking a shot at goal from inside the penalty area, and tapping it into the goal. There's something far more beautiful about seeing a great try created than seeing a goal created in football, in my opinion. And that's what we ought to be focusing on. And that's why I say we need a marketing person who understands that point, who understands how beautiful rugby league can be, and who knows how to get that message across. And I think that's probably a good point at which to end this discussion.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go fill out our job applications for that RFL role, mate. See how we go.
Yeah, well, as a joint, maybe as a joint exercise. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome, mate. All right, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll do it all again next week, Martyn.
That's marvellous.
Awesome. Cheers.
Great stuff. Thank you.